Women of Reddit, what's something a man has done that made you think, wow, he stands out in a really great way? Story 1. Reacting calmly to someone else being aggressive. In situations that could have turned into unnecessary confrontation with others, even physical, it's very valuable to trust someone is not going to be easily provoked and will actually help de-escalate a situation. Story 2. I was at home, and I was at the university, probably a 20-minute walk. I called him to say that I would be late to see him because I forgot my umbrella and it was raining pretty hard, so I was going to wait till it died down a bit. Next thing I know, he shows up, umbrella in hand. I felt like I was in a rom-com. Story 3. My now husband got up at 7:30 every day our last semester to have breakfast in the cafeteria with me. He didn't have class until 10. He doesn't eat breakfast. We weren't even dating yet. Story 4. When my now husband and I had been dating a couple of months, it somehow came up that the house I was renting didn't have any carbon monoxide detectors. He didn't like that, and said he was going to get one and install it for me. I was like, okay, sure, and promptly forgot about it. And then the next week we lived about an hour and a half apart and only saw each other on weekends. He showed up with 2 and installed them before we went to dinner. It wasn't just that he cared about my safety, it was that he said he was going to do something and then did it at the first opportunity. I've had a fair amount of people in my life who promise a lot but never deliver, so the fact that he did, well, that meant a lot. A bit later, we were starting to get more serious, and he had gotten a new job after recently being laid off. He was talking about his future and that he might sell his house and buy a new one in a year or 2, and I said, oh, what would you be looking for? He replied, well, if we're still together, hopefully we'd be ready to live together, so if you still have the same job, something halfway between our current places so neither of us has a terrible commute. And I figure you won't want all of my wow stuff displayed in the living room like it is now, so we'll need a man cave, and if I have a space that's all mine like that, it's only fair that you do too, so there should be a room you can turn into a craft room or a library or whatever you want. I was blown away. No one had ever shown me such consideration and thoughtfulness like that, factored me into their plans without prompting and actually thinking about what I might want. I told him I loved him for the first time 2 weeks later, and yes, our house is both a man cave for him and a library for me. Story 5. He noticed what I liked as we started hanging out, and then kept those things on hand at his house. It's like a magic drink snack movie game portal every time I visit. Story 6. I was 17, went out with a fake ID, started talking to a considerably older guy. Naturally I attributed his interest to my maturity, sophistication, and poise beyond my years. When he stepped away from me for a minute, another man, total stranger, approached just long enough to tell me, you're obviously not old enough to be here. That guy you're talking to is not a good guy, you should go home, he'll call you a cab if you need one. The creep came back, and as soon as I started showing hesitation about him, he became incredibly pushy, trying to get me to go somewhere alone with him. I insisted on getting a cab, and he tried to get me to tell him my address to tell the driver. I ducked him and got in the cab. You'll never know exactly what that stranger saved me from that night, but it wasn't going to be good. I don't even remember his face, but I still think about him sometimes. Story 7. Changed his opinion on something when given evidence to the contrary to his original beliefs. He's one of the most thoughtful people I've ever met, genuinely listens to people and actually weighs the things people say to him, never just dismisses people without deeply considering their words and their perspective. I can't wait to marry him. Story 8. This was a coworker, not a romantic interest, but ordered me flowers on behalf of the company for an event and had specifically instructed the florist to make sure they were non-toxic to cats so I could take them home. Just him remembering that I had a cat and putting 2 and 2 together in that way was way more thoughtful than most dudes trying to date me ever were. Really blew me away. Story 9. Not done to me, but I actually met someone in an emergency room. His dad was sick, and despite the stressful situation and long wait, he stayed so patient and reassuring. He kept comforting his dad with the sweetest smile, making sure he felt at ease. The way he handled everything with such grace and warmth really stood out to me. Story 10. I grew up in an environment where arguments were loud, shouting to get a point across, so it was something I thought was the norm. My first argument with my boyfriend, now husband, was very mature, and he never once yelled. He was empathetic and heard me out, and put his points across calmly, without making me feel bad. We ended up having a constructive conversation and resolved it calmly, and got ice cream after. For years later, he's still never once yelled at me. I also don't yell, but that's because I'm a crier. Story 11. A man stands out when he's genuinely kind, listens attentively, remembers small details, and treats everyone with respect. Thoughtful actions leave the biggest impact. Story 12. He was hanging around my boyfriend at the time who was bragging about how he was cheating on me. The next night when we were all hanging out in a group, he asked if I'd like to go on a walk with him before I went home for the night because he wanted to talk to me about something. He told me everything I said about the girl because you deserve to know. He bought me a soda and talked to me while I processed it and never once made me feel like he was preying on that circumstance like people sometimes do. Story 13. From the first time we met in person and over 4 years later, he looks at me like I'm the most precious thing in the world. No one has ever looked at me with such wonder my entire life, and he takes such good care of me. The only time he's made me cry was last week when he surprised me with a photo album of our cat who's been diagnosed with cancer and only a few months left to live. I love this man so much. Story 14. I married my husband because he is the only man I have ever met who has ever apologized to me and meant it, not warped it into, sorry you feel that way or any BS like that. I can work through any problem with him because he is not afraid to admit when he is wrong and we face the problem together, not bash egos. I was not that way when we met, but he allowed me to learn to be vulnerable and apologize when I am wrong. Story 15. Basically, a chameleon type who can adapt to situations easily. He has confidence but still pokes fun at himself and doesn't take himself too seriously. Story 16. I went on a date with a guy and wasn't feeling it romantically, so I let him know at the end of the date. He took it so well that I genuinely thought he didn't understand, so I explained again. I thought he was so great I did, but wasn't interested in dating. He said he understood completely and was happy to be friends. I was so used to men not being able to take rejection and becoming insanely immature. Well, we've been together 9 years now and married for 4. He's the best guy ever, and I'm happy he was patient with me. Story 17. Every time we walk in a place he's been before, the workers smile when they see him and remember him joyfully. 711. Subway, literally anywhere we go. Story 18. I had a rough life growing up and it was still rough when I met him. Friends had fallen away and were off to their own lives. I was working in a call center. I was working triple-double shifts to survive in my apartment alone. My family isn't even a question on the table. I had just been alone for a long time. I met this guy on a dating app. I had been on a ton of awful dates as one does when trying to find your person on an app, but this one guy I saw had these pics of him in a hat way too small for his head and a couple of other photos I found endearing. We messaged for a long time, and it wasn't hollow conversations. Real conversations that weren't ended in one-worded replies. After some time and me giving up on dating for a bit, I deleted my app account, but I couldn't stop thinking about him, so a few weeks later, I made the account again and found him. We planned a date that week. He showed up to our first date with a small gift bag. Inside was a small 3D printed dino skull. He stood there in the sunset that evening telling me that he didn't know if I would like him, aka continue to see and date him should my birthday come in a month, and he wanted to give me a birthday present now just in case. He remembered my birthday. He remembered every detail from our conversations. He remembered I said I loved dinosaurs. He made me cry that night as I hadn't gotten a gift from anyone in a very, very, very long time. It was given with love. He's my husband, 7 years happy and going on till the end of time. Story 19. He showed me he had class, not so much by what he said, but by his quiet, considerate actions towards me and others. Needless to say, I'm one lucky gal. Story 20. My now husband, after a few weeks of dating, showed up with a journal head picked out. I mentioned in passing I liked writing. It was just a nice gesture. He saw it, thought of me and handed it to me without fanfare as he picked me up for dinner. It was the listening, the thoughtfulness specifically for my interest, and the modest way he did it where he didn't need me to make a big deal about his gesture. It was a sign he'd be interested in me and thoughtful in small ways. I thought 20 years in, I was right and it's held true. Story 21. Being patient and honorable, even when it's acceptable to be we met at a party. 2 other guys were hitting on me but said incredibly invasive and offensive things when I really started talking to them, asking repeatedly if I was a virgin and telling me women make bad scientists. Afterward, this dude stayed chill when I sat down on the couch next to him. I was pretty drunk. He never tried to pressure me. We talked bullshit. He asked for my number at the end of the night. We've been together 21 years. Basically, he was just decent and not trying to rush the tempo. Story 22. Certain guys will always stand out for me even years after we dated. Guy 1 offered to walk me to my car in a parking garage without me asking. Guy 2 was a really great communicator. Not just a conversation that flows so easily, but I never had to wonder if a long silence meant he was pulling back because he'd established his honesty enough where I knew he'd just come out and tell me rather than play games. Guy 3 brought me coffee at work when I was having a hard day, and I almost cried from how unexpected the gesture was. He worked in the building next door and took time out of his day to stop, get my normal order, and then found a way to get it to me without disrupting my day so that the kindness didn't become a hassle instead. Story 23. A girl and a guy I work with and myself were having a conversation about traumas and how it comes out in sleep paralysis or night terrors, but she had said something along the lines of I'm pretty up into mental hospital and everything, and he just sort of connected and made the comment we all have a past and we all have a story, just in the most understandable comforting way and stuff like that. Makes me think, wow, this human is a good human. No judgment at all from him. Story 24. When my husband and I first started dating, we went out to dinner. It was raining outside and there was a homeless man seeking shelter in the front entrance. People were laughing and being mean to him, and my then boyfriend invited him to sit with us and order whatever he wanted from the menu and bought his dinner. Knew I wanted to marry him that night. The nice man gave us random trinkets from his shopping cart and we still have them to this day. Story 25. This one man always surprised me by the small details he retained about me. I wouldn't even remember ever saying how much I like something, but he would. Story 26. I had a colleague who was absolutely rabid about credit going to where it was deserved. If someone, usually a woman, came up with an idea in a meeting and it was ignored for 10 minutes until a man brought it up again, the next thing that would happen would be him reminding the room that Jenny said it first, every time. Story 27. Guy here, but my guess is my wife would share the story. We went to college together and lived in separate apartments across town from each other. One day she was having a particularly rough time and was very much looking forward to just hanging out on the couch with me that night watching shitty TV. Unfortunately, at around 4 that day a big snowstorm rolled through, so we canceled plans to hang out, which just made her day worse. Without telling her, I packed a backpack, bundled up like I was going on an Antarctic expedition, and walked to her apartment. Thankfully another student saw me walking in the snow and gave me a ride part of the way, because I vastly underestimated the distance between our apartments. I get to her apartment, text her saying I have a joke to cheer her up, knock knock, who's there? Me knock. She still talks about it to this day, almost 15 years later. Story 28. I don't like kissing. I've had strangers and people I knew force them on me. My last ex was the only one who paid attention and never crossed that boundary or made me feel bad about it. Even when he really wanted to kiss me, I never had to explain it. He heard it once and never crossed that line. Story 29. Great self-control. We were in a meeting at work and this guy, actually, very competent person, was getting unfairly roasted by his superior who needed to put someone down. The guy just stood there stoically and neither crashed nor winced. He let the superior finish his nonsense and then moved on with his presentation. No reply, no defending himself, no apology. I was wet in my soul. Kindness, but not the naive pacifying kind, the type of kindness where you have a lot of power, no incriminating things about a person, and yet choose not to harm them. I weighs him in awe. Story 30. I cut my finger, relatively minor, on our first date. He came with me in the ambulance to get my finger stitched up, and then took the taxi back with me to my house to make sure I got home safe, before then taking the same cab back to the restaurant to pick up his car so he could drive home. He organized the next 2 restaurant dates and jokingly made one a burger date, and the second a chopstick-style date. We met for drinks in between these, and he also pointed out that the pubs had plastic pint glasses. That first date was nearly 2 years ago, and even though we're now long distance, he still surprises me with little gifts here and there. I try and do the same too. Story 31. Before we started dating, my husband and I would go swimming every week, hang out in the hot tub and about work and whatever. He never once checked me out. His eyes never moved from my face, or if they did he was super covert about it because I never noticed. He was incredibly restrained and respectful. Story 32. When my now husband picked me up for our first date, his car was clean, he smelled nice, he was nicely dressed, and he was polite and friendly the whole time. That alone made him stand out in a really great way. Story 33. When I was still in uni, I went home every other weekend, which is about a 2 to 3 hour commute. My at the time also went home on weekends, but his hometown is 2 hours in the opposite direction. Still, this man would insist on driving me home so I wouldn't have to take the bus, even though it was out of the way, summing up to a 6-hour drive for him. Come Sunday, he would also pick me up. Story 34. A guy made a pass at me at a coffee shop. I politely declined. He said something like, "Okay, well thanks anyways, you have a great night," with a smile, and then turned around and started to walk off. He didn't call me or insinuate I was ugly or get angry. No grumbling, no moaning. He got about 5 feet from me before I went and asked him for his number. It was such a shock that I had to see what else he had to offer. Even if he wasn't really my type, we didn't click, but I sent every girl I thought head like his direction after that. Story 35. He mentioned alternative contraceptives for men by himself in a conversation, and how unfair it is that there's the pill for women but not men, and that the financial aspects are pretty unfair. I don't know if it's just me, but most men I met never had a single thought about preventing pregnancy besides that it's a women's job. He's my boyfriend now. Story 36. A guy I met in line while getting a sandwich, chatted a bit, and then stopped in traffic to bring me a chair to sit on as I waited in line in a drizzling rain for theater tickets. One of the best moments of my life. I still have that fold-up camper chair and will keep it to my death. Story 37. This is not my personal experience, but rather what I have witnessed and know about a dear friend's significant other. So, my friend and her have been together for 31 years now, since my friend was 19, and the first time I met him and spent some time with him I immediately knew that he was an amazing man, and madly in love with my friend. The way he was so attentive to her all night, but not in a controlling way, making sure she wasn't cold and asking her if she didn't want his jacket, the tender, passionate gazing at her especially when she was talking about something she loved, the soft caressing of her back, holding her hand and stepping in front of her as a big guy who looked disturbed and disturbing, really looked like the man had mental issues, started walking fast towards them. To protect my friend. And then the things I know he does because my friend has told me, the most significant ones being he loves taking care of the house, although he works full-time just like her, and does martial arts 3x a week, dishwashing, vacuuming, cleaning the bathroom, etc., and really loves to cook, and loves to cook the things she loves, especially because she hates cooking. When they had a child, he did everything except breastfeed their baby, and my friend didn't even need to ask him to help her, he simply did it, whether it was giving the baby a bath, changing his diapers, picking him up when he was crying, etc., whenever my friend was busy or not feeling well. And when my friend's mother was very ill, and my friend and her 2 siblings took turns staying with their mother because she refused to go to a hospice, and they could only hire professional help if one of them was present the entire time and taking care of her, doing everything for her, my friend so took turns too, and took care of his mother-in-law, whom he always called Mom, although his mom was still alive, and he loved her the best way that he could. My friend has truly been blessed beyond measure with the man she shares her life with and has a son with, but that's because she deserves him. She is an amazing person too, and the last time I met up with them, a couple of years ago, he still looked at her like she was the most beautiful woman in the world. I bet he looks at her that way every single day. Story 38. No woman likes getting honked at when you walk down the street, especially under 18. Hopefully it was more of a 90s thing and doesn't happen as often as it did. I don't have to walk anymore now that I'm an adult and can drive well, so I don't know, but it's been over 25 years and I'll never forget the guy who just waved at me. Story 39. He door-dashed me lunch at work when I forgot to bring mine. I had a stressful day and was wound up. Every time I was getting tense, he would gently put me back to my relaxed position. I didn't even notice he was doing it until I was thinking back on my day. Insists on me sleeping enough on my days off. I work overnight, so most people expect me to change my sleeping pattern to better fit their schedule. Story 40. I met my husband when we were 17. Our first interaction was very uplifting. ID pass a test, our teacher would say if we passed out loud and would basically say name pass, and when my husband heard I passed, he looked at me, said wow awesome good job, and I was like thanks. Didn't really know him, thought he was attractive, and it was a nice little thing for someone I didn't know to be rooting for me. He did that often when I passed a test, gave me a high five, and eventually he squeezed in my conversation with my friend at the time, and then we ended up exchanging socials. He is very charismatic, and his way of asking for my socials was, oh, is he your best friend? I think I could out-best friend him. You don't have his socials. Well, you'll have mine and he'll be the better best friend. Definitely an excuse for my husband to get my socials and slide in my DMs in the most cheeky way. How he messaged me slide. I just slid in your DMs. He continues to court me, and one thing I absolutely love is how open my door for me. He has then and still does. It's just a little thing that fills my heart with joy. He welded me those metal welded flowers with a love note on it saying how his love for me will die when the flower does and much more OFC. That love note is on our fridge. We're 24 now and I can't wait to continue living life with this man. He married my crazy. Story 41. My husband got my brother-in-law to drive 40 minutes to pick me up after I had pulled over cold and drive from so much pain, spinal injury. Both good eggs. Story 42 was an ex of mine. We went on a second date in the city without realizing it was match day and it was heaving. He told me he's really uncomfortable with crowds, so I was fully expecting him to lean on me throughout the day. Instead he took my hand and led us through the crowds. This man told me he has a phobia and he pushed through it for me. I found it such a sweet gesture, and I wish I'd told him at the time as we didn't last much longer than that. Story 43. I used to store my debit card in my bra. One night, a group of friends and I were getting ready to go out and I pulled my shirt out to place the card in my bra. The second our male friend noticed what was happening, he turned away and waited a moment before turning around. It was the most gentlemanly thing I've ever seen a man do. Story 44. It is my now husband. Feels so good to say that. Well, I am in tech and I usually work from home, however I go to the office occasionally. This time was for a brainstorm meeting for an important project we wanted to undergo. I was the project leader along with someone else and everyone was brainstorming but also asking me a bunch of questions and I felt really overwhelmed as I don't like being the center of attention at all, even though I lead pretty well I'd say. I texted him after the meeting about 2 hours before close of day that the meeting was hectic and I was overwhelmed, trying to make light of it. This man legit saw my message and took a bus to my workplace. It takes 5 hours to get to by bus. When I closed from work and went to my car, I saw him standing there and looking at me with those pretty hazel eyes of his and I just felt so loved at that point. He opened his arms and we hugged for a long time. I was just taking in his scent. I asked him why he was there cause I hate feeling like someone inconveniences themselves for me and he was just like, I know you well to know that you would be overthinking everything you said in that meeting, so I'm here to take you home. You want to go watch the sunset before we go? It took everything to not just cry. I love that guy. Story 45. My now husband was a college student who used a bicycle to commute. When we met, he decided to get a proper vehicle to visit me because I lived an hour away. That vehicle was a motorcycle and he would drive it in the middle of winter where it get down to 20 degrees. He always swore that it was no big deal. Well, he finally admitted that the drive was miserable but worth it to see me. 3. Story 46. My ex and I are still great friends. He lives in the same city as my mom, who lives alone and has no family in town. As all of us kids and grandkids live out of state, he'll check in on her and drop her off jigsaw puzzles, which she loves, juice, fruits and vegetables. He may have been a shitty boyfriend, but I appreciate the out of him for these gestures. Story 47. This is about two guys actually. I'm a football soccer fanatic. I always wanted my favorite football team's jersey since I was about 13. It was a luxury I couldn't afford because we struggled a lot financially. In uni, 2 of my male friends' besties went 50-50 on a football jersey of my favorite team for my birthday. So teams have a home, away and third kit. They sneakily got information out of me to figure out which one I'd want. So whilst I thought we were just having a causal convos about our team's kits, they were extracting information out of me. I near cried when I opened the gift. That season my team went on to win the Champions League. I planned to have the jersey framed. Story 48. My now husband always did whatever he said he was going to do. He called when he said he'd call. He showed up at whatever time he said he would. Anything he told me, I could rely on it. A shockingly high number of the men I'd dated could not be relied on to do the simplest things. We've been together nearly 33 years, almost 31 married, and he's still that way. Story 49. I witnessed a guy assertively stand up to an injustice, clearly communicate his reasonable demands in a non-threatening way, and he assisted the person in fulfilling those demands without any negativity, and without raising his voice. Everyone parted as equals. It was the most outstanding and admirable thing I had seen in a while. Story 50. My wife says it was the moment I paid $91 for emergency vet treatment of her cat at a time neither of us had any money, but I had a credit card. Cat would have died others. In about 1984, married almost 39 years now. Story 51. He brought me snow ice cream. We were in college together, but he frequently went home on the weekends, 200 miles away. It had snowed there, and knowing that I had not seen much snow in my life, he packed up the ingredients and made snow ice cream for me in the parking lot of my dorm. We married and had 44 years together. Story 52. My husband. We were friends before we started dating, and I'd go around to his place for drinks with a few others on the weekends. One night, his kind of stepbrother was there, and his phone got a message. My husband passed it to him and gave him a little tease about it, possibly being a girl. Then he said to him, "I hope you're not talking to more than one girl, 'cause that's not cool," meaning flirting, chatting up. He was very genuine when he said it, and it wasn't to impress me. Story 53. He made me feel heard. I was new to this group of people and am fairly introverted and naturally soft-spoken. The people around me were great and fun people, but the first time I tried to speak up I was accidentally spoken over. I felt so awkward and embarrassed. But he noticed and he said really kindly to the person who had accidentally interrupted me, "Oh hey, sorry but I think Opie was trying to say something." And the guy that interrupted me apologized profusely and they all seemed genuinely interested in what I had to say. I'd never felt so valued amongst a group of already established friends. He made me feel heard, didn't make me or anyone at the table feel awkward, and I got to speak up. Thanks to him I grew closer to these amazing people and found my voice amongst them. He rarely has to step in again, but he's done it for me and for others on many occasions. Such an amazing guy. Story 54. Everything about my fiancé is a green flag, but what first struck me about him was his attitude about life. He calls every weekend a vacation and absolutely treats it as such. He has such a positive outlook that I can't help but try to find the good in things too. He is the biggest supporter of everyone he loves. If you're taking a picture, he's up there shining his phone to help you get better lighting. He will sit at your feet and pass you your baby shower gifts. He is 100 himself no matter who he's with. And he's the only man my sister has ever liked, which says a lot, because she has hated every single boyfriend of mine since I was 16. He jumped at the opportunity to help my mom and I take care of my stepdad as he was dying from cancer and helped us through some of the worst days of our lives, and we had only been dating a few months at this point. My mom actually pulled me aside during that trip and said, "That is a man you marry." I've always dated horrible men, and for my family to see his kindness and encourage me to lean into him was everything. Story 55. He drove me to a self-defense class I was scared to start, the first 5 or so times, and waited, and drove me back, just reading a book in the car for an hour, either side of a 1-hour round trip, simply so I could go with some support and not have to drive while stressing so much. Story 56. ID had a really rough day and communicated with him that I wouldn't be very chatty while I processed my thoughts. He sent a lovely message saying he was there when I was ready to talk. Later that evening he called me and asked me to go to my front door. He had traveled nearly an hour and a half to leave flowers on my doorstep just to make me smile. The sweetest thing was that he wasn't waiting at my door. He was in his car at the end of the road ready to drive back home because he was respecting my wish for space to process what happened. Obviously I did ask him to turn around and we talked for a while. He comforted me and then went home. That kind of care and respect just makes me realize how lucky I am to have him in my life. Story 57. When a guy does things and doesn't expect women to fuss over them, they make a mess, they clean it, they are hungry, they start cooking, they notice something needs fixing, they get on with it whether or not it is a masculine job, and they don't expect praise for it. Like it's just common sense to them. You know what I mean? My theory is these people were raised by single parents and haven't had that "you boys watch the game while we cook dinner" type of experience. Story 58. My ex and I approached a busy intersection where a man's truck had broken down in the middle. Without hesitation, he put our car in park and jumped out to help push the man's truck. No one else got out to help. We lived in a big city where most people keep to themselves. He was different. He befriended a homeless man with a dog who occupied the corner of his workplace and became concerned when he stopped showing up. Story 59. My friends and I were attending a wedding and were all staying in a big Airbnb. While we were getting ready doing hair makeup, one of the guys in the group steamed his fiancée's dress and then went room to room to pick up and steam all the other women's dresses. He then delivered the dresses back to each room a few minutes later. He said he noticed his fiancée forgot to pack the steamer, so he put it in his suitcase because he had extra space. Once he warmed the steamer up for her dress, he figured he'd steam all the dresses since he had extra time. When we attended steamer couple's wedding later that year, another boyfriend in the group Airbnb steamed all the dresses, so it's become a fun friend group tradition. Story 60. I had a girl who was really impressed when I locked my keys in my car and didn't lose my. I called a locksmith and then got lunch and she legit thanked me for how I handled the situation. Story 61. It's a tiny thing compared to some, but when I asked him not to use some words when talking with me, like refer to anything as or bitchy, etc., he just said okay and never used them again. He didn't argue how it's just a word and I'm too sensitive, just accepted it. Story 62. Reading threads like this make me feel like I could have been a better boyfriend to my last relationship. We eventually broke up because after 3 years, coming to see me still didn't feel like coming home to her. Now I'm just wondering what I could have done to be that. No hard feelings towards each other. We're both very grateful for 3 great years, but that bit does sting a little. Story 63. I'm always surprised by how many small details my boyfriend retains about me. Most of them I don't even remember mentioning to him. He's so patient with me and never minds it when I stim. Story 64. He is the most confident person I've ever met. Bordering on bragging until I came to understand that he also does not lie. Ever. The dude is a machine with a heart of gold. Story 65. Whenever I make a mistake or screw up in some way that Anoe shirtsangers him or whatever, we talk it out, I apologize, he accepts, and then he's back to normal and literally never brings it up again. It is such a relief to never fear that the person you are with is holding a grudge. He also never keeps a score. There is no I did this for you, so why can't you XYZ, or I am so X, so why are you Y? His relationship philosophy is that he gives whatever he can on any given day, and I do the same, and then we show empathy and grace for one another whenever one can't give very much. I never feel like I fall short or disappoint him or don't make him happy.